Hi everyone, my name is Nevan Serasundara. I was part of Sri Lanka's contingent at WSTC for 2021. I've been a Thomian debater from 2019 to 2022. I've coached the national pool in 2024 and coached the Asian International School in 2023 and 2024. And today I'm here to walk you through the rookie model versus free agent debate. So in terms of proposition, I think for setup, there are a couple of things you need to do. The first thing that I would do if I was on prop one was really define what the problem in free model agencies are. And that is a lot of money is concentrated in a couple of teams at the very top, and it's very, very anti-competitive, right? Like, for example, we've seen teams like Manchester City win the Premier League 4 times in a row, right? And they've been competing and contending for the Premier League since 2018, and they've always won it except for one team when Liverpool won it once in 2020. Um, so you can just characterize it like that a lot of the huge problem is that there's so much money that's coming into these leagues and it's only concentrated within one or two teams, right? And that is the kind of overarching characterization which I would portray. The next thing that I would like to do is then characterize what a rookie model system is and a free agency system is. So in terms of a rookie model system, the first thing, like in terms of definition, what you would try to do is oftentimes it's these leagues put in all the rookies that are graduating from universities or high schools into this rookie draft system. And how usually players are assessed is based on their performances in college, inter-university competitions or inter-high school competitions, and their evaluations are placed based on those, and that's how it works, right? So oftentimes these drafts work in phases, right? So there is a first set of drafts that work, and it goes till around 7 picks, 7 draft picks that you could take. And oftentimes teams could trade the picks that they have. So, for example, um, if one team takes in a trade for one player, they could trade that off with another player, trade that player with another player, who's getting a team that has picked another player down the picking order. They could trade the player for the player plus money, right? But then the main thing that you want to focus on in the rookie draft system is that the teams that finish at the bottom of the league oftentimes get to pick first. When it comes to the rookie model system, right? So if you end up 20th in the NFL or 20th in the Premier League, in the next season's draft system, you'll get to pick first. So that means the best player in the league in 2023, where you ended 20th, in 2024, you get to pick the best high school player who was in 2023 or the best college player who was in 2023 for your side. So that's how the rookie draft system usually works, right? And in comparative, there's a free agency system, right? So athletes usually get to negotiate contracts directly with teams with no interference from the league. So a consequence of this oftentimes is that if you are a good player, the best teams will want to sign you. So then the best players will always go to the best teams, and the mediocre players will go to the mediocre teams, and the bad players will go to the bad teams, right? And that kind of entrenches this hierarchy system where the top teams oftentimes outperform the rest, right? So, in terms of the model, you would kind of describe what I've already described, right? Is that all new players entering into the league enter into like an auction. In these auctions, the team that finish at the bottom of the league table will get to choose first, and you go up and up and up, where the highest finishing team chooses last, right? So that's like the basic model that you would choose. In terms of like the arguments which I think proposition can broadly run, I think there's two things. The first is on increased competition, right? So I think the context you need to prove here in this increased competition argument is that teams which have a lot of money have the best facilities, hire the best like coaching officials and the best officials in sport, and have better players, and therefore it is kind of lucrative to join those places, right? Because you're either motivated by two things. Number one, you want to win trophies. So being playing for Manchester City or playing for the New England Patriots, right? You are likely to be in a good team that's going to compete for trophies, right? Or like if you're part of the Kansas City Chiefs, oftentimes you're going to be constantly competing for trophies and you're going to bring glory to yourself. So that if you have the best facilities, best managers and stuff like that, you're likely to achieve those things. And if you want to get paid the most, the teams that often do well often attract the best sponsorship deals and things like that, and you're likely to get paid most. So good players are most likely to get attracted to those kinds of positions, right? um Best teams. The result of this is that leagues become increasingly boring to watch, and it's also just competition doesn't exist anymore, right? Because a team that has, for example, a wage bill of like $2 million is competing against a team that has a wage bill of around $600 million a year. So given all of those things, right, it is very, very anti-competitive, and the league just doesn't have enough competition, right? And there are effects of this, right? So like it becomes very, very boring to watch when one team keeps on winning over and over again. So the overall health of the sport probably going to decline over time because people just lose interest when one team is constantly dominating, right? So that's, I think, the big impact that you could draw when it comes to like the overall health of the sport, right? On comparative, you can say new up and coming talent go to worst performing teams, which allows those teams to get better. So the best high school or college football player goes to a really low ranked team. Because of their ability, they're able to get those teams performing better again, which allows them to surge up the table and compete better, right? And then worse players go to the top teams, which pulls down their like overall standing. So the league is a lot more competitive, right? So there are a couple of like impacts of this. The first is that the entrenched power that big teams have reduces. The second is that the league is a lot more equitable now, right? Because a lot of teams are now competing for the top spot. Like any team can win the title, right? And that's a great thing, right? So for example, in the NFL, in the past 12 years, ten different teams have won it, right? So it's a lot more equitable that way. And then of course it's increased fan engagement, right? Because constantly you never know who's going to win, right? And this is really good because when there's increased fan engagement, there's more revenue that comes into the league, which means salaries in the sport increase, and there's a lot of benefits associated with that, right? So that would be like your first big argument that you would run. The second argument I think you could run is this idea on player development. And I think the analysis there is to say that when players go to lower leagues, they're likely to lower ranked teams, they're likely to get more game time, right? Because if you go to strong teams, there are probably going to be a few more players already ahead of you, right? So because of that, you're unlikely to get like starting positions and stuff like that for you to really develop, right? So your development as a player could be substantially limited by going to a really strong team. So yes, right? And then because you go to a smaller team, you're likely to become a star for that team far more sooner, and you become a star earlier on. That could be benefits because that means you're earning a lot of money sooner rather than later. So that's really good for the players. In terms of opposition, right? Um, I think in setup, you just want to say, look, our model is basically you allow players to choose and you maximize player choice, right? And I think there's two things that like opposition has to prove here. The first is why does it increase competition? So there are a couple of reasons as to why, right? So the first you could talk about, look, these teams already have a lot of money, right? So because they have a lot of money, that power is always entrenched because even if like shittier players go to bad teams, they have bad coaches, they have bad facilities, so they're unlikely to ever stand up to these things, right? So not going to work, right? And then also they don't get groomed, right? Because they're surrounded with mediocre players or bad players. They can't do good with a bad team, right? Because most of these are team sports. So you're surrounded by mediocrity, so you're not really going to do a lot when you're going to bad teams, right? Then the thing that you could also say is that the trading system allows teams to entrench themselves anyway, right? Because you can, like I said before, you can trade draft picks, right? So if a 20th team picks up the best player, right, another team could say, hey, we'll give you another player plus cash, and we can get that player. So the system, it doesn't really work that way. But I think the second thing that you need to prove, and this is why I think opposition could really push this and win the debate, is about player choice. Because in props world, players don't get any choice, right? They get picked by a team, they're shipped far away, and they're forced to play for these teams that may not represent them, or may not represent their values, or like it's really far away, they have to live away from their families and all these kinds of things, right? The player has zero choice, right? They could get traded to another team with like zero consent, right? So the life is in total control of the team. And I think you could like really draw parallels between these players and like workers is the best example, right? Because this is like um a company completely owning everything that player does, right? Where that player is going to live, for example, right? So total control over the players, and because of that, because they have total control, and you can't necessarily break off from this team and force a move to somewhere else because you signed a contract, right? Your life is in total control of these teams, right? So the harm to that one person is going to be really, really bad, right? So then let's look at the possible clashes, right? There's a clash on competition, right? So on proposition, what you want to say is, given all these things that competition, like, oh, you're not going to increase competition, say, yeah, but those are very mitigatory, right? But we're not giving them that huge advantage that they're going to get anyway on side opposition, right? Because on our side, we're actually doing something to stop them. Sure, there might be some means at which the other team that you can get those good players anyway, but we're closing some loopholes that allows good players to always go to good teams, right? And then the second thing is that, oh, even if they can be traded, teams' incentive is to win, right? So if even if you're a mid-tier team and you have a really good draft pick, why would you trade that off when you could possibly use these draft picks and win the league yourself? You're self-interested. You're likely to get bigger benefits by playing the league with with good players. That's going to and get a higher position because that's going to generate more revenue and more sponsorship for you later on, right? And the biggest thing that you need to do is to really focus on bettering the league and bettering the sport overall. And the opposition, rather, in this instance, is to use all the mitigation mechanisms I told you before, but then collapse the clash into the players, into the collapse this like collapse this clash into the players' clash, right? And um, this is where like really opposition can win, right? Because you can really push off the rhetoric and the analysis that you have zero choice in these kinds of debates, right? But then how does prop kind of win on try to win on players, right? You could run the whole development and becoming stars idea, right? Because on ops world, like they're unlikely to become stars and like unlikely to develop. So that's going to be really harmful to them, right? And there are incentives to not treat players like shit, right? Because there are huge backlash that could happen to the sports team, which could like affect their stock price and could affect future sponsorships and stuff like that, right? And then players could, if they're not getting their way, they could play bad and make the team perform even worse, right? So there's an incentive to really give the players what they want on props world, right? And what you want to do is try to collapse the clash onto the league clash. Whereas ops winning strategy here is always just prove the depth of the harm to one person versus like fan engagement and stuff, right? One person matters way more than this idea of or like the harm to an individual is far worse than the like less fan engagement, for example. So yeah, that is my debrief of the motion. I hope it was informative and you guys learned a lot. Thank you.